Did you know that in England, 1 in 3 sales fall through? The conveyancing process, the part of the process after the sale is agreed, is where so many things go wrong, and you've got a chance of failure which is quite high. That's why today I'm joined by James Allum. He's a solicitor, and he's going to answer some of the key questions about the conveyancing process. I'm Jack Flower. I'm an estate agent and have been working for many years. I started my career in London, where I worked for some of the largest corporate agencies, and then I moved out to Bath, and I now live and work here and have my own company, Flower Property. We do residential sales, lettings and property management. And so firstly, I'd like to introduce you to James. James, tell us about yourself.
So I'm a property solicitor based in Bath. I started working in Clifton in Bristol, where I trained, doing residential and commercial property. I then worked for a property developer in Bournemouth in-house, which I don't think many solicitors can say. And then I've worked in a practice in Bath, doing lots of, again, residential conveyancing and commercial property. And I've now gone to be self-employed as a partner at Carbon Law Partners. We're again across both residential and commercial property.
Great, fantastic. So I'll start first with the big question. Why is it you think that so many deals do fall through in England and Wales especially?
Yeah, I mean, that is straight into the deep end. I think sellers want to sell and buyers want to buy, right? It isn't usually the sellers that pull out, because it's normally the reason a transaction will fall through is because the buyer has decided for whatever reason that they don't want to proceed. So I suppose the question is, why do buyers not want to buy in the sort of conveyancing process? I think there are a myriad of reasons that could be. There's a lot that happens in conveyancing. A conveyancer is one part of the conveyancing process, in that they are checking the title to the property, raising searches, carrying out normal inquiries that happen in the conveyancing process, and there's then the reporting of all of that to the buyers. So the buyers may find something in all of that information that they didn't know, and I think a large part of that.
Just that's fine. You can pick that up from there.
From where I was, yeah.
I think a large part.
Yeah, a large part of that really can be done by or can be addressed by sellers before even marketing the property. So if there are things that a buyer may not want to, sorry.
That's okay.
Again, from the same point.
If there are things that may put off potential buyers, a seller can try and address those at the earliest possible stage. So, for example, if a seller has carried out an extension, the seller can make sure that they've got the relevant building regulation sign-offs, they've got everything from a paperwork perspective and from a compliance perspective that they might need to ensure that a buyer will be comfortable with all the work that's happened at a property. So really, I think sellers looking at themselves and looking at their properties and working out and pulling together everything they can about the property before even potentially marketing the property, or at least as early as possible, can definitely go a long way to help the conveyancing.
That's an interesting point. So do you think then it's important perhaps for the agent, so my part of the transaction, before we market it, to work out the things which might be potentially an issue, which will come up in the conveyancing process, and make sure that that's clear in the marketing from day dot?
Yeah, I think so. I think how well a conveyancing process will go is largely determined by a seller from the day that they acquire the property, right? Because everything they do from that day could potentially come up in the conveyancing when they come to sell. So I think, yeah, absolutely. As from the agent's point of view, finding out any works that have been done, everything, basically finding out as much information as they possibly can in relation to the property, so that the seller can provide this information and the agents can provide that to potential buyers. Then there aren't those sort of hidden points that could come out in the conveyancing process, and you'd hopefully sort of weed out any problems that a buyer may have as early as you possibly can, which should hopefully mean the conveyancing process goes as straightforward as it can.
Yes, hopefully, of course. I think there is a tendency perhaps on the agent side, what I've experienced in the industry, where if there are those issues which might potentially come up in the conveyancing process, it can be swept under the carpet. And the hope is from the estate agent that it won't come out in the wash and that you'll get away with it. But that usually doesn't happen. So I think I agree with you completely. If the agents can be perhaps a little bit more honest and clear from the start, if there are potentially issues with that property, that you might then avoid these issues later on down the line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So the transaction process to get from sale agreed to exchange and completion takes a long time. It can take up to 16 weeks is sometimes where the average figure is here in England and Wales. Why do you think the process takes so long? And if I am a buyer or a seller, what steps can I take to make that transaction happen more quickly?
Yeah, so I think the point we've mentioned about providing as much information as you possibly can to the agent at the earliest possible stage as a seller will only help because it means the agents can provide as much information as possible to the buyers. I think that's the first step. I think the second step really is that conveyancers talk a lot about a conveyancing crisis that's happening at the moment, okay? And this is really coming from the amount that conveyancers are required to do now compared to what they were required to do sort of 20, 30 years ago, when previously it was really just looking at the title to the property, whereas now it's the title, raising searches, so asking the local authority questions and getting environmental information, lots of other points. Finding out lots of information about planning and building regulations, any works that have been done to the property, getting all the relevant certification for all those works, and then making sure that a buyer is happy with all of that information and their lender is also happy with all of that information. So the amount required from conveyancers now is so much more than it was, which I think has put a lot of pressure on the industry. It's created some sort of very low cost, high volume options for conveyancing, which we can go into. And it's pushed a lot of good conveyancers out of the industry. They don't want to be conveyancers anymore because the obligations are too much. So it does take, I think, longer than people would like, and I think conveyancers tend to get the blame for that. But I think really from a buyer and seller's point of view, I think the sellers can provide as much information as they can at the start, and that will help. And I think both the buyers and the sellers picking the right conveyancer is really, really important. I think in conveyancing, it's never been more true that you get what you pay for. And if you go for a really cheap option, you will have a bad experience. In my view, and from what I've heard from lots of clients, you know, they tend to go with a really cheap option once, and they have been burnt, and they will never do it again. So I think that's a really key point.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we'll definitely go back to how you should choose your solicitor later on, because that is a fundamental part of the process to pick the right person. Yeah. But jumping on this, how long the transaction takes question, and how many transactions do fall through. In Scotland, there's a completely different system where the seller, when putting the property onto the market, has to get a buyer's pack for potential buyers who are looking at it, which will have searches already completed, a survey completed, a lot of the work which now in England and Wales is done after the sale is agreed, and which, as you said, contributes to that length of time that we have to get through to exchange and completion. Do you think something like that could work in England if we were to have a buyer information pack completed by sellers with those searches and surveys done? And do you think it could help reduce the number of fall-throughs and also reduce the time it takes to get to completion?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we have that system in auctions at the moment, right? So at auctions in England and Wales, they have an auction pack, a legal pack, which contains all the information we're talking about. I mean, at the moment, we are stuck with the system we have in that in a normal, what's called a private treaty, so a normal conveyancing transaction, purchase and a sale, not at auction, the buyer will carry out their own searches and their own survey, which, yes, definitely slow the transaction down, because the local authority search, for example, that's the one that tends to take the longest. That can take anything between generally sort of 15 and 30 working days. At the top end, if a local authority is experiencing big delays, it could take 60 working days, so sort of 3 months. So yes, I think absolutely that getting to a point where providing as much information as you can at the start would definitely help the transaction go smoother. I don't think we're at a stage where sellers can provide searches and a survey. That still needs to be done by buyers at the moment. It's just the system we're in. It's all around lenders' requirements and who owns the searches and the survey and all the rest of it. But yes, I think it would be good if we can get to a stage like that. Yeah.
So when you say it's not necessarily possible right now when it comes down to who's owning the searches and lenders' requirements, tell us more about that. What would perhaps be the limitations there to stop us from doing it in the way that Scotland has it at the moment?
So at the moment, the buyers will have to order their own searches because the lender wants the buyer to order their own searches because they want to rely on the information that the buyer and their solicitor has obtained. And we have to remember the buyer's solicitor is also acting for the lender, right? So they have a duty to both of them. So yeah, we're stuck with that basically.
No, fair enough. But hopefully changes.
Yeah.
Or at least it seems like there's an appetite for change for sure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a little bit earlier about people getting burnt by taking the cheap option or choosing the wrong solicitor. If I am a buyer or a seller and I've just got the deal agreed, what should I look out for when choosing a solicitor or a conveyancer? What are the key things I should be looking out for?
Yeah. So I think the starting point is the estate agent will almost definitely tell the seller and or the buyer a recommended solicitor, right? And that will generally be a buyer's and a seller's starting point for what solicitor to go to. That can work really well, and at other times it can work really badly. So the important thing and the distinction between it will likely be whether it will work well or whether it won't, is whether the estate agent is getting a referral fee for making that recommendation from the solicitor. Because if they are, the estate agent is really making that recommendation because they're getting a gain out of it, right? I think from both the buyer's and the seller's point of view, it's important to ask the estate agent that question, because if they're not getting a referral fee, then that's a really good sign because the estate agent is only recommending that solicitor because they are genuinely good at their job and they want the transaction to go through smoothly. So I think that's a really key thing that buyers and sellers can be asking for. I think away from sort of estate agents' recommendations, sellers, they've obviously already bought a property, so they will have used a solicitor before, and that can have a benefit because the solicitor will hopefully still have the file and they'll have documents from the purchase, so that can work really nicely. That saves some time. Otherwise, I think the important thing is not to go for the cheapest option. This what I say to every client I speak to. You give a quote and they say, oh, I've had a quote for half the price, right? And I say, you can go with them, but you absolutely will regret it. I don't mind if you don't go with me, but don't go with the cheapest option, because it will generally be handled by someone who isn't a qualified conveyancer. They won't say no to work, so they'll take on too much and they'll have too much on. And it's a bit of a recipe for disaster, to be honest. So I think looking at local options with solicitors who have local knowledge is a really good starting point. Looking at reviews is a really good thing. There's Google reviews are a good place to start, but there's a website called Review Solicitors that also gives reviews on conveyancers. And otherwise, I think personal recommendations are useful. Speaking to people who have bought and sold properties, conveyancers that they've used. And I think when you're getting in touch with the conveyancer, being quite direct with them and asking, how much capacity do you have? How much space do you have for you to take on my work? Because, as I say, some firms will never turn down work. And that can be a real problem because conveyancers will make themselves too busy. And they from your point of view, you need to make sure they've got enough time to progress your case and want to make it happen and go through as quickly as they can. So I think, that's a really important question to ask.
Yeah, I think all very good points. I think especially what you said about referral fees is a big hidden part of the industry which most people might not know exists, where there are a lot of estate agents where a big portion of their income comes from referral fees to mortgage brokers, to solicitors, to other professional bodies, and they're often referring them for that fee as opposed to the quality of the solicitor themselves. So if you ask that question, that's a really good way of finding out, are they recommending that solicitor because they're good at the job, or are they recommending them to get a little bit of cash in the back pocket?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would just say as well, the solicitor's letter of engagement, the terms and conditions that you sign up to, if they are getting a referral fee, it will have to say in there that they're getting a referral fee. So if you're not sure, check that, because that will give you the answer.
Okay, so then there's no way of,
there's no
of hiding the truth there. Exactly. No, great, fantastic. So I just wanted to ask a little bit more about the pricing structure of how solicitors often charge for the conveyancing process. What should you look out for there? Because I know that some people might have a headline price, and then behind that there's a lot of hidden costs. Some people have a fixed fee, some people charge by the hour. How do you do it? And as a buyer or a seller, what should I look out for when looking at that charging?
Yeah, I mean, every conveyancer will charge a different fee, and every conveyance will warrant a different fee. So every transaction is bespoke in itself, and the best conveyancers will give you a bespoke quote for exactly what you want. There is a bit of homework to be done for every quote that gets given, every good quote that gets given. The cheaper firms we've discussed, their headline fee will be ridiculously cheap. It will be, 600 quid plus VAT. And then when you get a proper full quote, you'll realise that actually it easily doubles that, if not triples, by the time you've got the cost of your searches and disbursements that solicitors charge, ID fees, money transfer fees, land registry fees. So I think as a buyer or a seller looking at getting quotes, ensuring that you've got the full quote is the starting point. So is this everything that I'm going to need to pay? And ask the question. Don't be afraid to get that answer. I think asking if there will be any other additional fees as well. Any additional fees which the conveyancer can foresee coming up. And yes, trying to get a fixed fee, which most conveyancing firms now you can get. They may have a bit of a caveat and some wiggle room in there for if something unforeseen comes up, genuinely unforeseen, which again comes back to our point about a seller making sure there's enough information out there so that a conveyancer can give the correct quote, and then again there's no sort of hidden bumps down the road.
So essentially, often those cheap fees that you see, they are too good to be true, and there are lots of hidden costs there which you need to look out for. Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. And I think, getting a fixed fee is important. Certainly, myself and lots of other conveyancers will give you a fixed fee, and we try not to deviate from that as much as we can. I myself try to give you just one global fee for everything that a conveyance will include. So, lots of conveyancers will charge a legal fee, a purchase or a sale fee, and then a file opening fee, and then a leasehold fee, and then a mortgage fee, and then a file closing fee. I myself, and lots of other conveyancers, it's just one fee, and that's what it's going to be. Conveyancing, it's very standard to then list the disbursements that I mentioned separately, so the money transfer fee, ID fee. But in terms of the actual legal fees, I think just one figure works much more nicely. I think we should all be trying to aim towards that. It's just much clearer.
Yeah, much clearer. I completely agree. And so obviously we're talking about pricing. That's one of the things which you want to ask your solicitor. What do you charge? But if I'm phoning up James and I'm looking to buy a property, what questions should I be asking you to find out if you're the right solicitor for me to choose? Yeah,
I think, the fee is obviously important. The capacity question, I think, is really important. How much time do I have? I think I think being prepared to hear an honest answer. I think clients can get a bit frustrated sometimes. I know I've had it where I've been particularly busy, and I've said to clients, well, look, I'm really quite busy at the moment. And it's important as a conveyancer to be honest about that. I think there's no point lying and saying, oh yeah, great, I'll take your matter on and we'll get it done by next week, and it's just a lie. So no, important to be honest, and I think important for clients to get that honest answer from conveyancers about how much capacity they've got, because that will really make a big difference in the transaction. I think in terms of other information, understanding how much of an infrastructure around that conveyancer there is. So do they have a team? Do they have admin support? I think that's quite important. What happens if they're ill or they go on annual leave? These aren't as important things, but I think that they're things that are worth considering. I think they're the important points.
No, so I think two of the biggest points you said is capacity, cost,
and
then all these other points are important. But if you know that they've got the time to do the job and that they're charging a fair price, you're probably in a good position to choose them. So you are self-employed, like myself. You've got your own business which you're building. Tell me more about that and how that maybe makes you different to some of the other bigger solicitor practices which people might go to. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it means I only get paid based on what I bill and when I bill, right? I'm not getting paid a salary that a conveyancer in a larger firm would be getting paid. So I have a vested interest in getting a transaction from A to B. It really, clients generally want it done as quickly as they possibly can, and so that's exactly what I want, because the quicker it goes through, similar to yourself, the quicker it goes through, the quicker I get paid. So but equally, I suppose the difference between perhaps you and I is where I've sort of got my duty sort of to look out for the best interest of the client, and if there is I'm acting for a buyer, and if there is a genuine problem, it's raising that and telling them about it and exploring that in as much depth as we need to allow them to make an informed decision. So as much as I want the transaction to go through, that actually isn't always the answer. It's digging into it more and giving them the right service. So I think that's probably the biggest pro, if you like, of me being self-employed from a client's point of view. But I mean, from my point of view as well, it's I love what I do, and building a base and a client base and showing clients the great service I can offer, I think is really important for me and my brand, so that they can go away and give those recommendations to the people they know, and ultimately the practice will grow. So service for me is absolutely paramount to everything I do, which I think with me being self-employed is a great benefit to a client.
Definitely, because I know it's the same for me. If someone instructs me, it's me who's dealing with every part of the transaction and process, and that's the same for you, right? It's not that you'll be the one who meets them on the first day and then it's passed off to a legal assistant. You're dealing with everything throughout the entire process from start to finish, and I think people really value that they've got you for the whole journey.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, it's that personal service, right? It's you've got me, you've got my mobile number. You can call me when suits you, and let's let's try and get the transaction through as quickly as we can.
Well, that's what we all want. That's definitely what we all want. So, James, you've told us how you do things differently. What's different about perhaps choosing someone who's self-employed? Have you got any particular examples that you could tell us which might evidence that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was one transaction we completed on recently. I was instructed back in September 24. So we've had 2 stamp duty changes since then. Just remember that part for this story. It was a couple. She was pregnant. Still sort of 7 months to go, plenty of time. Anyway, we get into the transaction. We deal with their purchase and it's all going really well. On their sale, we're dealing with one of the low-cost firms that I've talked about. We received some inquiries. The client had everything that they could have possibly needed, which was fantastic. They'd converted a shed in their garden to a studio, so they had all of the building reg sign-offs they need, and all the electrical certificates, everything else. So that was really easy to provide, and that went through really smoothly. We then got to a point where we were ready to exchange, and this was probably around sort of February time. So we still had plenty of time before the stamp duty changes at the end of March, and more importantly, her giving birth. And yeah, we were ready to exchange. The buyer's solicitor said, "Oh, our system's showing that we've got some more inquiries to raise, but I can't find them." So we said, "Okay, well, we must be ready to go. So let's go on an exchange." We didn't hear anything for another 3 weeks or so, and then they came back with 4 new inquiries. And so all of a sudden, we're rushing around to try and answer these further inquiries, which could have been raised, at the start of the transaction, sort of back in September, October time. So, that was definitely an unnecessary delay. A further point on that is this. What we thought was a very short chain. We thought, we were buying and selling, and there was one purchase ahead of us on top of our purchase and one sale below us. It then transpired there were sort of 2 further purchases up the chain and about 3 further sales down the chain. So what that meant is all of these transactions needed to get to a point to exchange before anyone could exchange. And I think finding that out at a late stage really didn't help, because it meant the agents within the entire chain weren't talking about how progressed each transaction was. And so no one really knew when everyone else was ready to exchange. So all of a sudden, we're into March, we're ready to exchange as we have been for some time, and the rest of the chain isn't. And we're chasing all the time. My client's about to give birth. The stamp duty changes around the corner, so everyone's going to pay at least sort of $2,500 more in stamp duty, and it's just a nightmare. The client was extremely stressed, as I'm sure you can imagine. And anyway, we in the end we missed the stamp duty deadline, and it completed in early April. So it was a real shame for the client in that they had the additional cost, and the real shame is the stress. I think it circles back to what we've been saying about picking a conveyancer right, and you get what you pay for, both in terms of the conveyancer doing work, but also the agent. If the agent in that case, if all of the agents had done more work in finding out how long the chain was, there was absolutely so much time that could have been saved there that I think wasn't. And it was, yes, we got there in the end, but I think it's one that was more of relief rather than joy.
Yeah, I know the feeling. Had plenty of transactions just like that, James. I think it comes back to what you're saying. You want to pick someone who's got the time to do that due diligence, to take those extra precautionary steps, so that these things are avoided, rather than then frantically dealing with them after they come out in the wash in the months after the sale's agreed. James, thank you very much. I think it's been a fascinating conversation, really interesting. I'm sure lots of people who are watching or listening to this can feel a little bit more confident going into a property transaction now with some of your words. I'm sure people will want to reach out to you if they are interested in finding out more about you. What's the best way for them to go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you search James Allum on Carbon Law Partners, if you type that in Google, I'll come up straight away. Even typing in Carbon Law Partners and then finding me on the website, all of my details are on there. And any residential or commercial property transaction, I'd be delighted to help.
James, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
I've been Jack Flower. Thanks for watching. See you next time.